Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bite Size History on History with Audrey D. In today's lesson, we are going to be taking a final look at the rise and fall of the kingdoms of Kush. We're going to be focusing on the merchant class, how it rose, and also how it may have led to the demise of the kingdoms of Kush. If you are enjoying these lessons so far, please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button. Also, find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon as History with Audrey D to further support this channel and get behind the scenes and more bite-sized history facts. Let's go ahead and get into our lesson on the rise and fall of the ancient African kingdoms of Kush. First up, we need to go ahead and take a look at our learning goals and learning targets for today's lesson. Now, we are again going to be covering Standard 2, which is to describe the emergence of early civilizations. Our learning goals today are going to include describe the rise and fall of the ancient East African kingdoms of Kush and describe traditional economies and elements of those economies that led to the rise of a merchant class and trading partners. Our learning targets for today are going to be analyze how scarcity led to the rise of a merchant class and trading partners, which led to economic growth. Define traditional economy, merchant class, and trade, and analyze a chart or map of Kush and its trading partners to determine which civilizations traded with whom. We are going to have two essential questions today. Those questions include, how did the economy of Kush lead to the rise of trade partners and a merchant class? And what role did scarcity play in the rise of Kush, the merchant class, and trading partners? As we discussed in our episode on the geography of Kush, the ancient kingdoms of Kush were rich in gold, iron, coppers, and exotic animals, as well as having fertile farmlands without the need of the Nile floods, and most Kush citizens were actually farmers. Let's start out by reviewing some vocab terms that will be key components of our lesson on the rise and fall of the Kingdom of Kush, as well as the rise of the merchant class in Kush. Now, these terms are traditional economy, trade, trading partner, and scarcity. First up, let's take a look at what a traditional economy is and some modern-day examples so we have something to compare it to. A traditional economy is a system based on customs, history, and traditions that shape the products and services produced, as well as the way they are distributed. Two modern-day examples of traditional economies include Bhutan and the Orubu tribe in Brazil. Both of these groups rely on their traditions and native customs when deciding how their trade and commerce should be performed. Kush's economy was also considered a traditional economy, as it depended on trade and local customs were involved in creating trade agreements, as well as the history of the culture and how they operated within their cities when buying and selling goods. Now, trade, another term that we're going to be covering today, is the buying and selling of items, which is still practiced today. This practice often results in trading partners between neighboring nations. A trading partner is a region or country that another region or country buys goods from and or sells goods to. In this lesson, we will be looking into the trading partners of Kush and how that impacted the growth of the merchant class. The final term we need to know is scarcity. Scarcity is the state of being in short supply or a shortage of something. Scarcity is what drove the economy of trade due to certain countries having access to resources that other countries did not. As we discuss the history of Kush and its rise, we'll be taking a look at the trade and trading partners of the kingdoms of Kush and how these impacted the rise of the merchant class. As a preview, let's take a look at a few maps of Kush and its neighboring kingdoms. In our first map, we see the Egyptian trade routes from roughly 1400 BCE. On this map, we see how the trade routes go from Kush, Punt, Egypt, Arabia, Asia Minor, and even up to Greece. Items such as timber came from Byblos on the Arabian Peninsula and made its way to Egypt, Greece, Kush, and Punt, and most likely to the African interior as well. In turn, Kush and Punt were well known for trade in gold and copper. This shows us that Kush most likely traded with Punt and Egypt directly, and by way of Egypt with Arabia, Asia Minor, and Greece also. Our next map shows us the trade routes of Aksum, which is a kingdom we'll be discussing when we discuss the fall of Kush later in this lesson. This map shows us the trade routes to the African interior, which would have brought goods into Kush as well. Items might include exotic animals or animal furs and exotic woods, only found further inland. This map also shows us the nautical or maritime trade of goods around the Horn of Africa and onward to India. Now that we have a general knowledge of the trade partners for the kingdoms of Kush, let's go ahead and take a look at the history of the rise of Kush. With the rise of Kush as a kingdom, we see the rise of Karma, which was one of the major cities or kingdoms that grew wealthy due to gold mining and agriculture. Karma had a close relationship with Egypt as a trade hub due to its central location between Egypt and southern Africa. Egypt purchased or traded for cattle, gold, ivory, incense, leopards, giraffes, and other exotic animals. Nubians were also hired into the Egyptian armies due to their being skilled warriors. Karma was invaded by the Egyptian armies around 1400 BCE, which started a 50-year war, after which the Egyptians conquered the Nubians of Karma and ruled over them for the following 700 years. During this era, many Egyptian customs, traditions, and religious practices were adopted by the Nubian people and continued to be a part of the daily life and social structure long after Egyptian occupation. Around 850 BCE, an independent kingdom known as Kush was formed by the Nubians, with the capital being Napata. This city was located on a major trade route where caravans crossed over the Upper Nile River. These caravans of traders brought ivory and other goods from the African interior. These same traders would stop at Napata and trade for Kushite goods, and then continue on to Egypt. The Egyptians eventually withdrew from Kush around 1000 BCE, but still ruled the kingdom as their own. Over time, Kush grew to rival Egypt in power, which brings us to our first key figure or important leader of Kush, King Kashta. Kashta invaded Egypt around 750 BCE and made it all the way to the city of Thebes. However, it was his son, King Pi, who would finish the conquest of Egypt after his father's death. In 728 BCE, Pi founded the 25th dynasty, which governed both Egypt and Kush from the capital of Napata. Artifacts from the 25th dynasty include statues of the pharaoh Taharka, as well as other pharaohs that help us identify the dual kingship of Egypt and Kush through the representation of the pharaoh's headdress, which features a stylized depiction of a cobra, also known as the uraeus. This symbolizes lower or northern Egypt and the Nile Delta, while the vulture on the headdress represents or is symbolized upper or southern Egypt. Taharka's headdress had two cobras, which most likely represented Egypt and Kush as one kingdom. Kush's rule over Egypt lasted roughly 60 years, however, as between 671 and 664 BCE, the Assyrians invaded Egypt. At this time, the Kushites only had bronze weapons to fight with against the iron weapons of the Assyrians, and therefore were driven back to Kush out of Egypt. It was after this event that the Kushites learned from the Assyrians how to make iron, which also led to the creation of stronger farming tools and eventually stronger iron weapons for the military of Kush. The next level of growth we see for the kingdoms of Kush is the development of the capital of Meroe, which became the new capital of Kush around 540 BCE. Meroe was near one of the cataracts along the Nile, which allowed for greater safety against the Assyrians while also providing a way for trade and transportation for Kushites. Meroe also became the center of ironworking in Kush, as it was nearest to iron ore deposits that were mined and to trees which were used as fuel for the forge fires of iron production. The layout and design for Meroe was inspired by the great cities of Egypt. This included painted palace walls, a temple dedicated to Amun-Re being placed at the end of a long pathway that also had sculptures of rams lining the path. The graveyards are denoted with many pyramids marking royal graves. These were made to look similar to the larger Egyptian pyramids. The main difference between Meroe and an Egyptian city was the iron furnaces. Meroe became the heart of the trade routes, with iron products being traded with places as far away as Rome and China. These trade routes not only included iron products, but leopard skins and valuable tropical woods, as well as slaves. Items brought back to the kingdom of Kush included textiles, or woven cloth, cotton, and many other goods not available in or near Kush. Kush's merchants took inspiration from Rome when building their houses and public baths. Kush remained a great kingdom of trade for almost 600 years. We've learned about its rise, now let's understand why it fell. As Egypt was absorbed by the Roman Empire, Kush's power dwindled. Rome began to dominate northern trade, and around 350 CE, the capital of Meroe was abandoned. This began with the invasion of the Axumites in roughly 330 CE, who destroyed Meroe and brought down the kingdom of Kush. By this point, the lands had already been mostly abandoned due to overuse and depletion of natural resources, such as through deforestation, due to needing the timber to create their fires and the coals that fueled their iron forges. The lands were overgrazed and the soil depleted through unsustainable farming practices. Through these actions, we see the development of scarcity of necessary materials, which assisted in the decline of Kush. Axum, as we saw in our map earlier in this lesson, was a kingdom that grew near the Red Sea and eventually became a trading center similar to Kush. So as we can see, the kingdom of Kush grew in power and lost its power through the fluctuations of trade. The merchant class flourished from the trade routes that grew from the need of resources, tools, weapons, exotic animals, and so many other items, very similar to a consumer-based society today. It was the downfall of Kush that its lands and resources were poorly managed due to the desires of more wealth in the kingdoms and the merchants who traded these items across the lands. There we have it, the rise and fall of the kingdoms of Kush, and just what roles the merchant class played in its demise and its rise. In our next lesson, we'll be discussing ancient India and its geography. If you enjoyed this lesson and you are enjoying this channel, please make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button. Also, find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon to further support this channel and see more snippets of bite-sized history. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in our next lesson.